What does Rajasthan Bill against unlawful religious conversion say? Rajasthan Health Minister Gajendra Singh Khinswar on Tuesday tabled a bill in the state legislative assembly to stop unlawful religious conversions, known as the Rajasthan Prohibition of Unlawful Conversion of Religion Bill. It is expected to be passed during the ongoing budget session after a debate. The bill, which states that marriages for the sole purpose of unlawful conversion or vice versa will be declared void, is in line with the similar legislation introduced in other states such as Madhya Pradesh and Uttarakhand. In a bill, unlawful conversion mainly refers to religious conversion through coercion for allurement of fraud, with allurement including cash, material benefits, employment, free education, etc. The burden of proof that the religious conversion did not take place through misrepresentation, force, undue influence, coercion, allurement, or by fraudulent means or marriage lies on the person who has caused the conversion, according to this bill. This is the reversal of principle of assumption of innocence which normally applies to the accused person in criminal case. The bill empowers blood relatives to lodge a FIR in suspected case. It says any aggrieved person is his or her parents, brother, sister, or any other person who is related to him or her by blood, marriage, or adoption may lodge an FIR. It further states that those involved in unlawful conversion can be punished with up to 5 years in jail with a minimum fine of Rs 15,000. In case of unlawful conversion targeting a minor, a woman or person belonging to scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, the punishment can be between 10 years and 25,000. For an unlawful mass conversion, the imprisonment would be 3 to 10 years with a minimum fine of 50,000. Repeat offenders would face punishment not exceeding double what is provided under the law for each subsequent offence. All offences under the bill are cognizable where the police can make an arrest without a warrant, and non-bailable where the bail is a matter of right, where a bail is not a matter of right and a magistrate determines if the accused is fit to be released on bail. Cognizable, police can make an arrest without a warrant. Non-bailable, bail is not a matter of right and magistrate determines if the accused is fit to be released on bail. What are those wanting to convert voluntarily? Those wanting converting voluntarily would undergo a seemingly exhaustive process. A prescribed declaration form should be filled and submitted to the district magistrate or relevant authority 60 days in advance. Violations would invite up to 3 years imprisonment and minimum fine of 10,000 rupees. The converter or a person performing the ceremony would give a month's advance notice to the DM through prescribed form. Violating this would invite up to 5 years imprisonment and minimum fine of 25,000. Subsequently, an officer not below the rank of an additional DM will get an inquiry conducted through police with regard to real intention, purpose, and cause of the proposed religious conversion. The converted person will then have to send a declaration in a prescribed form within 60 days of conversion to the DM. A copy of the declaration has to be displayed on the notice board of the DM's office till the due date of confirmation. Said declaration will include convert's date of birth, permanent address, father's husband's name, religion before and after conversion, and the date and place of the conversion, etc. Convert then has to appear before the DM within 21 days of the filing of the declaration to establish their identity and confirm the contents of the declaration. Chief Minister Bhajanlal Sharma led government has cited the conversion of gullible persons as the key reason behind the bill. According to Bill's statement of objects and reasons, the Constitution confers on each individual the fundamental right to profess, practice, and propagate his religion. However, the individual's right to freedom of conscience and religion cannot be extended to construe a collective right to proselytize. However, the individual right to freedom and conscience and religion cannot be extended to construe a collective right to proselytize. The right to religious freedom belongs equally to the person converting the individual sought to be converted. In an interview with the Indian Express last year, Rajasthan Law Minister Jogram Patel said the bill was introduced to prevent forcible conversions, especially those of vulnerable communities such as tribal people, to check what BJP calls love jihad. This is not the first time such a bill has been introduced in the Rajasthan Legislative Assembly. In 2006, during the Chief Minister Vasundhara Raje's first term, anti-conversion bill was brought in. After opposition from Congress party and others, bill was returned to the President Pratibha Patil. During the second term, Raje pushed for an amended version of the bill. The centre returned it in 2017, claiming the bill deviated from the national policy. Trump's plan to own Gaza. What does Trump mean, and what are the implications for Arab states, Palestinians, and Israel? Why have Jordan and Egypt opposed the idea, and what are the regional implications of the renewed US pressure on Iran? On Tuesday, ahead of an extraordinary press conference addressed that he addressed with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the United States President Donald Trump announced some major policy announcements on the Middle East. First, he said the Palestinians should leave Gaza and that Jordan and Egypt should take them in. They, Jordanians and Egyptians, say they are not going to accept, I will say, any number of alternate sites could be identified for displaced Gazans. Why would they want to return to Gaza? The place has been hell. Second, he said the US will take over Gaza and do a job with it too. America will own Gaza and turn into a Rivera of the Middle East, he said last year. Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner had spoken about Gaza's very valuable waterfront property. Third, he said he signed an executive order to bring back massive pressure on Iran that his administration employed during his first term and redesignated Yemeni Houthis a terrorist organization. Executive order to bring back maximum pressure on Iran that his administration employed and redesignated Yemeni Houthis a terrorist organization. What are the takeaways from President Trump's proposal? The new proposal for Gaza risks violating long-standing resolutions on the United Nations Security Council and General Assembly supporting Palestinians' right of self-determination, which India has proactively backed, and several preemptory norms of international laws. Just Kogan's, including those that prohibit ethnic cleansing. Trump's claim that Gazans do not want to return contradicts visible evidence on the ground. Following the ceasefire, thousands have returned to North Gaza, even though Israeli bombardment has reduced the homes of many to rubble. The proposal to identify 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, or 12 alternative sites for Palestinians to live in peace with while Gaza is turned into a Rivera amounts to the biggest displacements and scattering of the Palestinian population since 1988 Nakba, and recalls the fate of European Jews before the establishment of Jewish state in Palestine. Radical shift in Trump's vision for Palestine contrasts his own peace to prosperity plan of 20, which presented a comprehensive pathway to Palestinian state, albeit with severely limited sovereignty and unprecedented concessions to Israel by legitimizing its illegal settlements in occupied territory and annexation of more Palestinian land. This new approach is more clearly transactional than before. Trump clarified that by taking over Gaza, he meant a long term ownership position. This language is distinct from framings of sovereignty or occupation and sounds closer to a real estate deal. Trump expressly refused to clarify it if the US has stopped supporting the two state solution, saying it would be clear in the coming weeks. Politically, for Netanyahu, the new Trump plan is ideal. His ruling coalition is dependent on the support from Bezalel Smotrich's Religious Zionism Party, a vociferous advocate for settlement expansion. Trump's statements and Netanyahu's assertion that Israel still seeks the complete elimination of Hamas from Gaza complicates the post-ceasefire scenario infinitely, with negotiations taking over stage 2 of the ceasefire officially underway since Feb 4. Statements by Trump and Netanyahu have created uncertainty over the substance of the Israel-Hamas agreement after the hostages are released. Why won't Egypt and Jordan accept Palestinians? Both countries has pushed back fiercely. The last two time Trump fleetingly voiced the idea. Jordanian officials have now reiterated their foreign ministry's September 24 statement that any Israeli attempt to displace Palestinians to Jordan would be considered a declaration of war and a breach of their 94 peace treaty. Both countries have already amassed more troops at their border, and the Israel Defense Forces have even created a new eastern division. Jordan's resistance is driven by ideological or more stakes in the Palestinian question and more by existential fears, both demographic and political. It is the world's third poorest state in terms of water resources, and it already hosts about 2.4 million registered Palestinian refugees. This large Palestinian population has long been a political powder keg, which has often grown restive over Jordan's perceived deep security ties with Israel and the US. The Hashemite monarchy has kept a close watch on them, especially since the events of Black September of 1970, when an armed rebellion by the Palestinian Liberation Organization threatened the rule of King Hussein until it was put down by brute force. In the decades since, Amman Amman has used a mix of political, social, and cultural instruments to combat and contain both Islamist and Palestinian nationalist currents within Jordan. Trump's plan risks reigniting these currents, especially as the Muslim Brotherhood linked Islamic Action Front won their largest ever seat share in the September 24 parliamentary elections for expressing strong support for Hamas during the after expressing strong support for Hamas during the Gaza war. Jordanian officials have now reiterated their foreign ministry's statement that any Israeli attempt to displace Palestinians to Jordan would be considered a declaration of war and a breach of their 1994 peace treaty. And the Israel Defense Forces have created a new Eastern Division. Both countries have already amassed more troops at their border. Israel Defense Forces have created a new Eastern Division. Jordan's resistance is driven less by ideological or more stakes in the Palestinian question and more by existential factors, both demographic and political. Egypt, the political concern for Cairo is largely similar, apart from the fact that accepting Trump's ideas and actively participating in scuttling Palestinians' question will have unpredictable political consequences both domestically and internationally. For President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, whose politics was founded on fighting against Muslim Brotherhood since the 2013 coup, these consequences might include fresh political fuel for a movement that he has fought hard to remove from Egypt. Trump's action and statement thus far has flowed against the political tide in the Middle East. Arab leaders have long rejected the idea of Palestinian resettlement. The foreign ministers of Jordan, UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar jointly reiterated this 4 days ago. On Wednesday, the Saudis issued a swift rejection of Trump's claim that kingdom does not insist on a Palestinian state to normalize ties with Israel. Even as he revived his maximum pressure policy, Trump said he would love to be able to make a great deal with Iran, but regardless of the position he takes, the relationship between Gulf Arab states and Iran have been on a positive trajectory. Consider Saudi-Iran bilateral trade resumed in April 23 and Iran-UAE Joint Economic Committee for Multi-Sectoral Cooperation held its first session in Abu Dhabi in May 24. In November 24, Fayyad al-Ruwali, Chief of the General Staff of the Saudi military, visited Tehran in an unprecedented defense contract between two countries. For four Iranian naval vessels are currently docked at Port Khalid in Sharjah, remarkable first in the history of UAE and Islamic Republic. These include the newest warships of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and pictures have shown IRGC officials being welcomed by Emirati government and military officials. Saudi-Iran bilateral trade resumed in April 23, and the Iran-UAE Joint Economic Committee for Multi-Sectoral Cooperation held its first session in Abu Dhabi. November 24, Fayed al-Ruali, Chief of General Staff of Saudi military, visited Tehran. IRGC attacks on commercial shipping in Strait of Hormuz has strained the UAE-Iran relationship for attacks for the decade, and the first Trump administration designated IRGC as a whole a foreign terrorist organization. Tehran, on its part, has long criticized Abu Dhabi for having normalized ties with Israel. Collectively, these developments raise questions over the implications of fresh US sanctions on Iranian entities and now on the new economic and military bridges that Gulf Arab states are building with Iran. Also, Iran last week expressed willingness for talks on its nuclear program if the West is serious, and Iran state media has lauded Trump's decision to end the foreign aid that Tehran believes helps Iranian dissidents and foreign based opposition. Story of Navik, crucial indigenous sat-nav system, hurdles in development path. India's space agency on Sunday reported partial failure of the NVS-02 navigation satellite due to non-firing of its engines in space. This was latest in the series of setbacks suffered by the IRNSS, operationally referred to as Navigation with Indian Constellation System (NAVIC). Navigation with Indian Constellation System (NAVIC). The IRNSS was conceived in 1999 following the war in Kargil, during which India's military could not use the American Global Positioning System in the conflict zone. India and US now cooperate in many fields, and Washington has approved the system. The indigenous seven satellite constellation serving both defense and civilian needs were proposed to be put by 2016, and the first satellite IRNSS-1A was launched on July 1, 2013. 11 years later, however, only 5 of the 11 satellites launched in the 2000 crore Navik program, including replacement for failed satellites, are fully operational. An indigenous seven satellite constellation serving both defense and civilian needs was proposed to put in place in 2016. The first satellite IRNSS-1A launched in July 1, 2013. 11 years later, however, only 5 of 11 satellites launched in 2000 crore Navik program, including replacement of its failed satellites, are fully operational. After IRNSS-1A in 2013, IRNSS 1B, 1C, 1D, 1F, 1G, H, I, J, and K were launched between April 2014 and January 29, 25. After launch of IRNSS-1G, the seventh in the series, ISRO has said the successful launch signifies completion of the IRNSS completion. What went wrong with the satellites? Mid 2016 onwards, there were reports of failures of the rubidium atomic clocks used in several navigation satellites, including ISRO's IRNSS and European Space Agency's Galileo Global Navigation Satellite System (GNSS). There are 3 atomic clocks on each IRNSS satellite. The then ISRO chairman A.S. Kiran Kumar announced in July 16 that all the atomic clocks in IRNSS-1A had stopped working, even though the overall performance of our navigation system had not been affected and the rest of the satellite components were functioning perfectly. A replacement satellites IRNSS-1H with modified clocks would be launched in 2017, Space Agency said. An ISRO navigation satellite navigation official had said that at the time that 6 of the 7 IRNSS satellites that were launched are still working, but there were inherent hardware related problems on the rubidium atomic clocks in some of these satellites. The clocks used in the Galileo had developed similar problems, official had said. Atomic clocks on 4 other IRNSS satellites, 1C, 1D, 1E, and 1G, also developed problems subsequently. The engine failures on the IRNSS 1K or NVS-02 launched last month, which has left it in a suboptimal orbit around Earth means that 6 of the 11 IRNSS satellites launched so far has been partial failures. Also, the IRNSS-1H launched on August 31, 2017 to replace 1A did not reach the desired orbit after a heat shield protecting the satellite on board PSLV C-39 rocket did not detach during the launch. So, how many satellites in the NAVIC system are operational currently? It is estimated that only 4 IRNSS satellites are fully operational currently: 1B, 1F, 1I, replacement of 1A after the launch of 1H, an original replacement failed, and 1J, 1BFIJ. ISRO's 23-24 annual report says following the launch of NVS-01 on May 28, 5 NAVIC satellites are operational: IRSS-1B, 1C, 1F, 1I, and NVS-01 IRNSS-1. However, according to some estimates, 1C is only partially operational due to the presence of old series of atomic clocks that were reported to be malfunctioning. First generation IRNSS satellites launched after July 16, that is 1H and 1I, carried modified versions of original clocks provided by European supplier under a 4 million deal for an estimated 45 clocks. 1J, which is operational, and 1K, which reported engine failure last month, belong to the next generation of IRNSS satellites and are on that account called NVS-01 and 02. The satellites are equipped with a mix of indigenous and foreign clocks instead of the defective clocks used in the first generation satellites. The NAVIC satellites provide two types of services: standard positioning service for general and commercial use, and restricted service, which is meant for the defense forces. Standard positioning service for general and commercial use, and restricted service, which is meant for defense forces. According to A.S. Ganeshan, a former director of ISRO's satellite navigation program, indigenous system provides positioning data at all times with position accuracy better than 20 meters during all weather conditions anywhere between within India and the region extending 1500 kilometers around India on dual frequencies in 1.5 and S band. L5 and S band, L5 and S band. A primary reason to develop indigenous satellite system like the IRNSS despite the existence of GPS and GLONASS is the reliability that it offers in defense use. Since the global NSS systems, GPS and GLONASS were primarily developed for military purposes, the military applications are one of the drivers of these systems. GPS offers encrypted precise positioning service which is available encrypted precise positioning service which is available only to US military and its allies. GNSS is used for different types of military applications such as military navigation and target acquisition. For NAVIC to become ubiquitous in the subcontinent, ISRO will have to sell its capabilities to general positioning service providers such as mobile phone manufacturers and vehicle manufacturers. In December 22, a few months after successful launch of NVS-01 on satellite on May 23, American mobile communications chipmaker Qualcomm reported agreement to incorporate NAVIC support in some of its chipset. Partial failure of NVS-02 1K notwithstanding, ISRO plans to launch 3 more second-generation NAVIC satellites, NVS-0345, to augment NAVIC base layer constellation with enhanced features to ensure continuity of services. Why temperatures at North Pole reached 20 degrees Celsius above average. The unusually high temperature at North Pole were the product of deep low pressure system, a region when the atmospheric pressure is lower than the surrounding locations over the Iceland. The system opened gates for the arrival of warmer air from lower latitudes, effectively bringing heat to the region. Why has the Arctic warmed faster than the global average? The global Temperatures have increased by around 1.3 degrees Celsius compared to the 1850 to 1900 baseline. The Arctic, however, has warmed 3.8 times faster than the global average since the late 90s, according to 2022 study. Multiple reasons. One of the prominent factors is the albedo effect of how much sunlight a surface reflects. Sea ice kept temperatures down in the polar regions, with its bright white surface reflecting more sun light to space than liquid water. But as Arctic ice cover is melting, more land or water is getting exposed to the sun, and as a result, more heat is getting absorbed. The lack of convection in the higher latitudes is another reason for the Arctic warming faster than the other parts of the world. एक तो पहला lack of convection in the higher latitudes is another reason for the Arctic warming faster. Convection occurs when air close to the ground is heated by the warm surface of the earth. Against his oath, Justice Shekhar Yadav's comment and refusal to step back called for Supreme Court response. Made highly objectionable communal and distasteful remarks against Muslim in a tone and tenor not in keeping with the dignity of his office. He seems to have forgotten that judgeship is not a blank check, it comes with responsibility. A healthy judiciary interrogates itself and must realize that hate speech cannot be couched in nationalism. Justice Rishikesh Roy, who retired, said in an interview that whenever such incidents happen, there are few options available with the institution talking to the individual, holding back work, in-house inquiry, or impeachment, while we await an institutional remarks. Response of any of the above options, Justice Yadav is holding his ground and refusing to walk his statement back. On December 8, speaking in an event in Prayagraj organized by Vishwa Hindu Parishad on the necessity on uniform civil code, Justice Yadav reportedly used a slur to refer to Muslims. He also reportedly said, "You have a misconception that if a law is brought in, it will be against your Shariat, your Islam, or your Quran," Justice Yadav said. But I want to say one more thing, whether it is your personal law or our Hindu law, your Quran, or whether it's our Gita, and I say we have addressed the ills, buraiyan in our practices, कमियां थी, दुरुस्त कर लिए हैं, the shortcomings, the untouchability, Shati, Jawhar, female feticide, we have addressed all these issues, then why you are not doing away with this law that while your first wife is there, you can have three wives with her consent. That is not acceptable. Without her consent, that is not acceptable. Following this aforesaid statement, there was an uproar in parliament that led to 55 Rajya Sabha MPs moving for the initiation of impeachment proceedings against him. His comments raised many eyebrows in the judicial fraternity as well. On the institutional front, he was reportedly summoned by the Supreme Court Collegium and was asked to tender a public apology for his remark. The Chief Justice of Allahabad High Court, also at the instance of the Chief Justice of India, sought his comments on the speech. It appears that Justice Yadav is in the least remorseful is not in the least remorseful over his statement and wants to brazen it out. One would have thought that after all the storm that his remarks had created, he would have looked within. On the contrary, he wants the senior members of the judicial fraternity to come to his aid. When he says that country will function as per the wishes of majority community, Justice Yadav is turning the constitution on its head. He is clearly and unequivocally aiding his voice to all those who are clamoring to make India Hindu Rashtra. And when he talks in terms of we and they, our Gita and their Quran, he is clearly othering Muslims. What Justice Yadav reportedly said at VHP was not only against the constitution, it was also in violation of the oath of office that he took before assuming charge. Equality, liberty, fraternity, and pillars of the Constitution. What are allegedly said was advocating the worst sort of tyranny. The idea of Delhi, that's what the city has voted for, and it has national resonance far beyond the capital. Protect the ceasefire. Donald Trump's proposal to take over Gaza threatens to derail the peace process entirely. On the eve of US President Donald Trump's inauguration, Israel and Hamas reached a fragile ceasefire agreement after months of negotiations. Both the incoming president and his predecessor, Joe Biden, were eager to take credit. Now, as the first of the three phases on the proposed path to peace folds, with the exchange of many hostages and prisoners still awaited, Trump's proposal to take over Gaza threatens to derail the process entirely. During a joint press briefing with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, suggested Benjamin Netanyahu Trump suggested a US takeover would be a long-term ownership position that would bring great stability to the Middle East. He would also amount to the most radical upending of the US policy. Trump had not ruled out US troops in Gaza, an extraordinary stance for a president who has consistently criticized America's present involvement in Eastern Europe and its invasions on Afghanistan and Iraq, reminiscent of the 1984 Nakba when 7 lakh Palestinians were displaced during the first Arab-Israeli war. Trump has framed this proposal as a humanitarian effort, claiming he wants to spur economic development, create jobs, provide housing for Gaza's 1.8 million residents who in the meantime should move to Egypt or Jordan. Both countries, however, have categorically rejected this idea, saying they will not accept Palestinian refugees. Any attempt to forcefully displace Gazan population would only fuel resentment and rebellion and long term lead to more stability. At this critical juncture, preserving a ceasefire should be the priority. Hamas, which de facto governs Gaza, has condemned Trump's plan, calling it alignment with Israel's far-right agenda. A forced relocation of Palestinians could trigger a military action that may spill over into Lebanon, as seen last year, and other parts of the Middle East. Renewed conflict could again bring in Hezbollah and reignite the Israel-Iran proxy war, jeopardizing regional stability. None of this augurs well for a two-state solution. Saudi has rejected Trump's proposal, saying it would not establish diplomatic relations with Israel. Washington's long-term objective, as envisaged in 2020 Abraham Accords, without the establishment of a Palestinian state. Other countries that were part of the Accords, UAE and Bahrain, were likely to reconsider their commitments as well. The only part that stands to benefit Trump's plan is Netanyahu's government, propped up by its far-right allies who continue to demand that Israel abandon the ceasefire. This week, as Israel and Hamas negotiate to the second phase of their talks, the process must be insulated from the proposals that threaten to derail it. The espionage case has taken a dramatic turn with the expulsion of Soviet national attached to USSR embassy. Armed tribal national volunteers extremists launched a fresh offensive in two villages in Tripura's West District, shooting down two CPIM supporters and injuring one, besides kidnapping three persons, including two student leaders, according to the police. Let's work together. India and Bangladesh must have much to gain from a positive bilateral engagement. Relations between Bangladesh and India have reached a critical juncture following the ouster of the Awami League regime in a student-led massive uprising. It seems to me that Indian establishment failed to anticipate the fail of Sheikh Hasina government. It is nevertheless necessary to remind ourselves the common interest and collaborative possibilities between our two nations. Professor Muhammad Yunus, the chief advisor and head of the interim government, and I are willing to work with due seriousness to build on positive aspects of the bilateral relationship pragmatically address issue areas of tension and misunderstanding. Our position has been clear from the outset. We want a good working relationship with India based on mutual respect. We hope and expect that our counterparts in India will reciprocate our desire. The December visit of Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri to Dhaka was a step in the right direction. The history of collaboration between our nations go back to the birth of Bangladesh, and its continuation will be beneficial to the people of both countries. Beginning with the last decade of 20th century, India has achieved remarkable feats, be it the vibrant technology sector with global influence on its economy, which is now the fifth largest in the world. Bangladesh too has its large areas of noteworthy achievements. Our garments export are second only to China. Our contribution to UN peacekeeping outnumbers any other country, providing essential service in the hotspots throughout the world. Microcredit models developed here by the Professor Yunus, Nobel laureate, have influenced the creation and growth of a global industry and been adapted on a massive scale in India. A lot of noise has been created in India about the treatment of Hindus in Bangladesh during the vacuum that existed between the fall of the previous regime on August 5, 2024 and appointment of interim government. The law and order situation in the country was not complete was not under complete control and untoward incidents did take place. These particularly impacted people closely connected to the previous regime, most of them Muslims, but also including Hindus. On assuming power, interim government took stern steps against the perpetrators of such crimes. Citizens throughout the country also stepped forward to courageously and successfully protect Hindu families and temples. Unfortunately, Indian media and cyberspace have continued to create negative hype by repeatedly grossly exaggerated and often completely false allegations. Interim government of Bangladesh is committed to the protection of rights of every citizen, irrespective of their faith, and Hindus in Bangladesh are equal citizens with equal rights. We were pleased when an independent survey conducted by the Voice of America found that nearly two-thirds of our population believed that the treatment of minorities has improved under the interim government. We seek to be a model for communal harmony for South Asia and beyond. We invite Indian journalists to come and report on what is going on without any restrictions. The Indian public can learn the truth from their unbiased investigation. Indian government has made sincere attempts to revive SAC, the regional association that has been defunct for more than a decade. Indian response so far has not been positive. We don't believe that India has anything to fear from this effort. We know it will take a long time to realize its full potential of cooperation among the South Asian nations. Despite challenges, we have seen some hopeful green shoots in the bilateral relations, such as recent exchange of fishermen signing of trilateral agreement that will allow Bangladesh to access a small amount of clean energy hydroelectric project from Nepal. Let's build on this positive steps. Trump tariff and revenue. White House may relent on Canada and Mexico, but China trade war may be a long affair. United States of America has now embarked on a path of muscular nationalism, with its opening salvo being the unleashing of a trade war. Interesting bit that the US went after its two biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico, announcing 25% tariffs on all imports from these countries with a 10% lower rate on energy imports from Canada. Tariffs were initially to go into effect on February 4 but have now been postponed by 30 days. The US action raises a number of questions, the key ones being why is the US doing it, what may be the effects of the tariffs, how might this end. On the question of why, it is instructive to note by noting the President Donald Trump, who campaigned extensively during the recent presidential election on issues surrounding the trade and security threat to the US from China, has imposed relatively minor 10% additional tariffs on China. He has singled out Canada and Mexico, two of the US biggest trading partners, jointly accounting for over 28% of total tariffs. The ostensible reason given for this is that it is intended to push Canada and Mexico to reduce the flow of illegal drugs and immigrants across their borders in the US. This reasoning is hard to buy since Canada has been included in the tariff net despite minuscule share of illegal drugs and immigrants entering into the US from Canada is compared to the flows across the US Mexico border. Indeed, Canadian officials who are negotiating with the US counterparts have expressed frustration at the lack of clarity from the US side regarding the actions or markers that the US requires to withdraw the tariffs. The more likely reasons for the tariffs are President Trump's long expressed love of tariffs as a marker of economic power and the federal government's desperation for additional revenues. While the deep protectionist zeal underlying the first reason will never go, the motive behind the second may be more malleable. Why is that? Corporate and personal income tax rates has been reduced under the Tax Cuts and Job Acts of 2018 during the Trump's previous administration. These are popularly known as the Trump tax cuts. Trump tax cuts, and they are scheduled to expire in 25. A key goal of President Trump is to extend or make these tax cuts permanent. However, extending them will be expensive with a congressional budget estimating that it would add 4.6 trillion over the next 10 years in the federal budget deficit or over 460 billion annually. This would require the US to pass a bill to raise the federal borrowing limit as well as to approve the budget. Given the presence of number of deficit hawks among the Republican members of Congress, passage of such bill is far from guaranteed notwithstanding the president's current popularity. Revenue shortfall of the US federal government is where the tariffs can play a role. US United States imports around 4 trillion of goods annually, of which 15% comes from Mexico, 12% from Canada, and China accounts 13%. Collective import 42%. Simple arithmetic reveals at current levels of import from these countries, 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods, and 10% caveat for energy imports from Canada, which account for a quarter of Canada's export, along with 10% additional tariffs on imports from China, can raise upwards of $320 billion annually. This is almost 70% of the annual cost of extending the tax cuts. Trump has also threatened to impose tariffs on the European Union at the EU's US imports as at the US import share of 16%. A 25% tariff on the EU would net an additional $160 billion annually. This would take the tariff load up to $480 billion, potentially financing the entire annual cost of extending the Trump tax cuts. Where could all of this go wrong? First, accounting assumes that the volume and price of imports into the US remains an uncharged in response of the tariffs. That depends on how much of the tariffs get passed on to the consumers. If importers pass on some or all of the tariffs to consumers, then the demand will fall with it. The tariff revenues and the government can collect. The decline in volume will likely become more significant over time as importers and exporters try to find alternative sources and destinations for their goods. Second, given the extensive supply chain links in the North America between the three countries, some of these tariffs will inevitably pass through to consumers, which will cause US prices to rise. That may have political cost, since one of the key issues in 24 election was the cost of living with midterm elections due in 26 and wafer-thin Republican majorities in Congress. Political opposition to the tariffs will likely emerge if they persist for a significant duration. Third, countries subjected to tariffs typically retaliate with their own. Canada has done, Mexico has threatened to do. This will end up being costly for US exporters since these two countries currently account for 33% of US total exports. That too will be politically difficult to sustain. Given the above, the most likely scenario that may unfold is that Trump will keep the tariffs threat alive during the next 3-4 months to project optimistic budget revenues that can finance the extension of the Trump tax cuts. Once Congress passes the budget bill, the administration will begin to look for off ramps by pointing to symbolic recessions from Canada and Mexico. The China trade war, though, may be a longer affair. Turning point, cutting edge. India is embracing the idea of shifting public money into private universities and firms which are nurturing innovation. This makes for a greater bang for taxpayers' buck. From the outset, Dreamers for India has placed a high value upon science, technology, and scientific temper. First, first phase of this was centered around the Indian state. Previously, private organizations such as Tata, TIFR, BARC were brought under the fold of the government, and for some time this delivered good results, such as nuclear test of 1974. Gradually, we started seeing the problem of innovation policy or science and tech policy it was called in earlier decades in the more comprehensive all of society way. What we really require is intellectual capabilities in people, in firms, and not just in standalone government organizations. Intellectual power in Indian firms is a precondition for higher GDP. This is where comprehensive national power comes within. Intellectual power in Indian firms is a precondition for higher GDP. Intellectual power in Indian firms is a precondition for higher GDP. It is not enough to have engineers in ISRO who put the craft on the moon. Those engineers should be in universities and private organizations so that this level of imagination, ambitions, and knowledge is applied pervasively in society. In France, defense research is funded by the government and happens in private defense firms. In US, 80% of NASA's budget is contracted out to private firms and universities. NASA does not make spacecraft, private vendors do. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory plays a critical role in NASA's exploration of the solar system. It will come to a surprise that many to realize that JPL was created by a private university, Caltech, in 1936. From 1954 onwards, it had been the recipient of contract and resources from NASA for its operational role in NASA space exploration. Recent accomplishment of DeepSeek in China shows how innovation energy comes about in the country. The private team that created DeepSeek cut their teeth in computer science doing algorithmic trading. Indians feel a sense of pride when their money is used in ISRO to place a craft on the moon. There will be higher levels of societal gains when knowledge resides in private organizations and feeds into society. In December 24, the three of us wrote a paper on the foundations of science policy in India. We utilized knowledge from public economics to clarify the intellectual foundations of science policy. We suggested there were big gains in placing taxpayer resources into private firms and universities, and we have utilized knowledge from public administration and law to sketch details of implementation and how to do this contracting out in the Indian context. There is a natural connection between risk in research and contracting out to private persons. Government can contract out the same research problem to multiple implementers who take different pathways. Some pathways would fare poorly and flow of money into them would be stopped. Such unfolding of risk is harder than when laboratories and bureaucracies are built in government. organization. When private firm is in an area, for example, automobile component firm that challenge to produce a ball bearings of superior spec, it will try to do the research well because it has a direct interest in the knowledge sought to be produced. Such a firm would bring knowledge from its normal operations into an contracted research. It would care deeply about the knowledge, work, and execute it well, and then the knowledge produced through and publicly funded research would spill over into its economic success. Many in Indian science policy have, of course, been thinking on similar lines. The paradigm shift has been simmering, and for years we are remarkable amount when new paradigm is turning into action. An important new organization, Anusandhan National Research Foundation, puts out grants at about 2,800 crore a year through its new ways. It is likely to break new ground in getting public money out to private organizations. Paragraph 79 recent budget said to implement private sector driven research development and innovation initiative announced in the July budget. I'm looking 20,000 crore. This is an important milestone. An article in Financial Times says ISRO will buy launch vehicles made by private players. Taxpayer money will go into private firms who will do cutting edge engineering, and knowledge will feed into civilian applications and global competitiveness. In the recent year, MIT has worked on public funding to get more work to get more GPUs into private hands to deepen AI knowledge in India. In the olden days, taxpayer money would have gone into government organization, for example in IIT, and the equipment would have been used by state functionaries. Instead, MIT is aligned with the new paradigm. They have procured 18,000 GPUs, which will be in operations at multiple private IT infrastructure firms. MIT will give the use of these GPUs to researchers in Indian private organizations at the price of $1 per hour. This is philosophy of buy not make. Putting these four developments together, we may cautiously say 25 will shape us as an important turning point for Indian science policy. The Indian state is rising out of the concept of using public money to hire researchers who are civil servants to the concept of delivering public money into private universities and firms where cutting edge knowledge is produced. This is greater bang for the taxpayer's buck as opposed to vertical government-sized organizations. The broad idea of contracting out public resources for R&D to private persons is increasingly accepted. How would the implementation work? The research funding is not like ordinary purchasing say of pencils, say where contract performance can readily be tested and audited. As the old saying says, if there is no possibility of failure, it is not research. The puzzle now lies in developing these new ways. Our paper shows the elements of work required: changes in legal text, new versus old existing organizations, strategic thinking, and project planning. Let the money flow. Reviewing of banking regulations is needed to boost liquidity. Pakistan should reaffirm its support for the people of Kashmir. It should also keep the door open for India in case it decides to resolve the Kashmir question through dialogue. India's GDP is expected to grow from $3.7 trillion in 23-24 to $7 trillion in 2030-31. Financing India's capex will require higher savings. The investment required for a $7 trillion will be approximately $2.5 trillion, which translates into an investment to GDP ratio of 34%. Companies, corporates, and households are net savers with the government running deficits, limiting the amount of its investments. Private sector has not been investing its surplus. The share of investment to operate The share of investment to operating cash flow for listed firms is down to 56% in 23-24 from a peak of 114 in 2008-9. This could be consequent to a lack of confidence in future demand and uncertainty caused by geopolitics. With overseas flows muted, personal savings and investment, including overseas investment, will need to be incentivized. So, how can capital and financial intermediation efficiency be improved? The large corporate sector is using its own surplus to equity market, bond market, and bank credit but MSMEs have not received their share of credit. In the last few years, banks have been incrementally getting 40% or less of household savings as against 50% a year back. There are preemptions. In the last 2 years, banks have brought 13 trillion of G-Secs against a deposit inflow of 40 trillion, driven by the need to maintain liquidity coverage and statutory coverage liquidity ratio. Banks maintain 115% to avoid breach. Given the low supply of papers from the manufacturing companies which also qualify as assets in LCR, banks buy government bonds to meet liquidity coverage ratio. To maintain some cushion in liquidity coverage ratio or the mandated levels, bank end up holding SLR securities of up to 26% against the regulatory requirement of 18%. Banks are also required to maintain a cash reserve ratio of 4% of deposits. So when one looks at the regulatory preemptions, they are close to 30%, 26% LCR, 4% CRR, reducing the lendable resources for bank, leading to higher lending rates. Under the proposed LCR guidelines for digital deposits, banks would have to invest even more in liquid assets to meet LCR, which is estimated to be around 2 to 2.5% of deposits. But do we need both LCR and SLR? Globally, only LCR exists. Most parts of the world include CRR, which earns no interest as high quality liquid asset, and volatility of deposit calculation and consequent investments of HQLA asset need to be examined on bank specific basis. More efficient cash management by the government has meant the overall liquidity available to the banking system has decreased since the surplus is parked with the RBI. Bank have a priority sector lending to a requirement of 60% plus. This is because 40% we have priority on priority, a framework drafted ages back that needs to factor changes in GDP position and new priorities. Also, we need to examine the move to cash flow based lending and risk based pricing. Otherwise, large sections of population will be outside organized finance, having limits on clean lending on the rate of high risk weights will not solve the problem, but supervision with extension of tech, including AI, will. Credit growth lower than nominal GDP growth is a major concern. An in-depth review covering markets, regulation, banks, and priorities is needed. Defending the rupee when the reason for weakness is dollar strength needs to be examined. This leads to reduction of liquidity, overvalued rupee, and no effective shoring of the currency. Credit to deposit ratio collection and its purpose should be examined. Banks should need to raise both debt and equity from investors to fund growth. So they need to generate returns. Also, the investment in technology are huge. Technology in spending by global banks is 9%, has outpaced revenue growth. Indian banks too are spending on tech capabilities, with large banks reporting 5% annual spend. Indian banks also have social responsibility costs that need to be discovered for not charging for UPI transactions, which account for major share of bank volumes, recovery of network cost, and other reasonable bank charges. Bank bond market in India is third in emerging markets, and despite the inclusion in global indices, our share is 3% compared to Indonesia's 14.5%. Cash market looks to have adequate liquidity across the yield curve in the secondary market. Tripura now land linked, peace restored under BJP Shah. Tripura has transformed into a land linked state from landlocked state. Significant work was done. Now connected through airways, land, rail, waterways. After the BJP came, Amid US-China trade war, India signals better investment protection for partners. The groundwork for the BIT revamp has already begun, and the treaty with the UAE, which offers protection for foreign portfolio investors and includes entity-based protection, reflects the new approach towards investor-friendly investment norms. The revamp of the 2016 model BIT was flagged in the Union Budget after multiple West trade partners cited burdensome norms. Every electrified technology hybrid electric vehicles must receive policy support. India's second biggest market for OpenAI, says Altman. Geo building world's largest AI infrastructure in India. Finance Ministry direct employees to not use AI tools like ChatGPT, DeepSeek. Strictly avoid use of such tools like ChatGPT, DeepSeek in office computers and devices over concerns pertaining to confidentiality of government documents and data. Nissan likely to scrap 60 billion merger talks with Honda. Gaza plan draws global flag. Saudi says no Israel ties without Palestine. Protesters torch home of Mujibur during Hasina's online speech. Protesters vandalized the residence of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman at Dhaka. A large group of protesters vandalized and set fire Bangladesh founder Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's residence in Dhaka during online address by daughter. Sweden shooting death toll reaches 11. France government survived no confidence vote after US Argentina withdraws from WHO. Trump to sign order barring transgender female athletes promoting ill will. India born rapper jailed. Subhas Nair began his 6-week jail term for attempting to promote ill will among racial and religious groups through online posts in multi-ethnic Singapore. Government stops solo expeditions to Mount Everest. Nepal government has formally ended solo expeditions and other mountain peaks above 8,000 meters by making one mountain guide mandatory for two people. Argentina's president has ordered the country's withdrawal from WHO due to profound differences. Aga Khan, spiritual leader who left his mark on developing one, dies at 88. Wanted Support Act to perform lead roles. US plane brings back 104 deported Indians, most from Gujarat, Punjab, and Haryana, working on safe migration. MEA to panel. Trump says US should take over Gaza, allies says no. Trump says US should take over Gaza, allies says no. A United States military C-17 aircraft carrying 104 deported Indian nationals. C-17 aircraft. Wide gap between street maths and school maths. 8,000 candidates joined PM internship scheme in 4 months. How Dalit couple argued own case won damages for intellectual property laws. Freebies or development East Delhi divided. Amid fresh churn in BJP, Manipur BJP Biren in Delhi braces for stormy assembly session. The 10 Kukizo MLAs of the 16-member Manipur Assembly have not been attending the session since the start of the ethnic strife and are not expected to attend the upcoming session too. NPP MLA and Kaisi passed away last month. Remaining MLAs comprise 30 BJP members, 5 members of its ally Naga People Front. Amid fresh political churn, Congress said it was observing dissension within the BJP. We don't have the numbers to move an confidence motion, but we are told that there is an internal bickering within BJP and more than 10 MLAs are against the CM. Our political advisory committee is taking stock of the situation. We are observing it. We will do what it takes to restore stability in Manipur. Following the appointment of former Union Home Secretary Ajay Bhalla as Manipur governor, who is now directly monitoring the developments there, center is in the process of bringing back normalcy in Manipur. NIA is arresting anyone who is creating troubles from both from meaties and cookies. Message is clear, so any change at the top is highly unlikely. Six opposition ruled states demand rollback of UGC draft regulations. Bengal business boost from Synergy panel to mine project. US military plane lands in Amritsar with 104 people on board. India may not ramp up climate targets for 2035, set to miss submission deadline. India's 2035 climate action to reflect disappointment of COP29 outcome on climate finance. India, however, is not ready with 2035 action plan and in no hurry to meet the deadline. In fact, the Indian NDC might be submitted only in the second half of the year, closer to annual climate meeting in Brazil in November. There is no penalty for late submission. Not many countries have submitted their 2035 NDCs. Sikkim BJP chief to meet minister over green nod. Modi takes dip in the Triveni Sangam. Uttarakhand interfaith couple alleges threat after marriage notice goes viral. First live-in relationship under UCC gets nod. A week after Uniform Civil Code, Uttarakhand government has registered the first live-in relationship. As of Tuesday evening, the government has received 6 applications, of which one had been approved, while others were being examined. Home Secretary Shailesh Bagoli said the details of applicants are encrypted. Officials can only view the applications and registrations while the details will remain only with registrars concerned. System is secure and we have taken precautions against any breach of private information of couples applying for registration. Bajrang Dal leader Vikas Verma, however, claimed they are aware of the details and are checking for interfaith couples among the registrants. We have come across a case in Haridwar where the couple are from different religions. We are constantly on lookout for dangerous cases. Uttarakhand government had on Jan 27 rolled out UCC rules for regulating live-in relationship. Registration requires couple to fill a 16-page form and obtain certificate from religious leader showing they are eligible to marry if they so choose. In the UCC rules, registration is only for the purposes of record keeping and requires the registrar to forward this registration to the local police station where the couple resides. Civil society members have flagged concerns regarding infringement of the privacy. Malika Virdi of Mahila Manch said there are apprehensions surrounding women's safety due to mandates under UCC which brought into effect in the name of protection of women. Supreme Court has guaranteed that privacy is an inalienable right under unless there is violence when the state can come in. The UCC gives power to anyone, including your neighbor, to complain. What is the protection if a woman cannot exercise her agency while a section of society decides what is public morality? Roorkee tens were firing at MLA office. Kerala 44 child abuse victims killed selves in 16. The Prime Minister offered Akshat and Chundri also. When Gandhi met Tolstoy for the first time in Jaipur, the right to vote is the right upon which all other rights depend. Thomas Paine. So that's all. See you in the next one.